Hello, and welcome back to Autistic FM. My name is Haje. I use he, him pronouns, and I'm your host on this journey. You can subscribe to Autistic FM wherever you get your podcasts, and it would be awesome if you did. That's how we grow and that's how we thrive. Over on our website at autistic.fm, you can find episode transcripts and additional information. We also have discussion threads for each individual episode, a neurospicy discussion forum, and much, much more. And all of that is free. If you become a supporter for as little as $5 a month, you can get a sneak preview of the topics we have coming up and even submit questions for our guests. You can also add topics to our future topics wish list, and you can get access to supporters-only discussion groups. We have a bunch of additional supporter treats coming up, so stay tuned. In this episode of the podcast, I am delighted to be joined by Conner Herman. She is a passionate advocate and an expert in the field of sleep and neurodivergence. She's the founder of a company called Percy, a groundbreaking startup that leverages innovative technology to improve sleep quality, especially targeted at the neurodivergent population. We dive into the profound impact of sleep on mental health and drawing from Conner's personal experiences of postpartum depression and her professional journey in behavioral psychology. We explore the intersection of sleep, neurodivergence, and how understanding sleep as a physiological response can transform lives. A quick trigger warning. There are discussions about postpartum depression and maternal suicide, and we also mention sleep and mental health, including the use of medications and a brief reference to child abuse. We don't go into a huge amount of graphic detail here, but please do look after yourself and listen accordingly. I think that's all I had to share. So with all of that out of the way, let's roll the tape. Hello and welcome back to Autistic FM. Today's episode is one I have been looking forward to since I started this podcast, if I'm being super honest with you. Conner is by now an old friend and is working in a world that is incredibly relevant to this podcast and to my interests. She runs a company called Percy, and I'll let her talk more about that in a moment. But for now, my wonderful friend, what's your name? What are your pronouns? And where in the world are you?
So my name is Conner Herman. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm in Washington, D.C.
Oh, wonderful. What is your relationship with neurodivergence?
I have a personal one and a professional one. Neurodivergence runs in my family. I was not personally ever diagnosed with anything, but I know that things were spicy on my side of the family growing up. And then after I had a son who was diagnosed with ADHD, my husband got diagnosed with ADHD. And then that kind of pushed me into looking into myself and what's going on with me. And I'm like, wonder if I've got some of that too. So I think that personal connection made me more open to the fact that there are lots of different minds out there, and I guess lots of different lives because lots of minds work differently. And professionally, though, I got into it in a roundabout, accidental kind of way. Do you want me to get into that right now?
Well, I mean,
Or
I feel like
should we?
an eighth, like it affects a third of our lives. So let's talk about it.
Yeah. Okay, great. So a long time ago, I'm old now. I have a 19-year-old son who's just graduating from high school and on his way to college. But when he was born, I got terrible postpartum depression, and I had been doing a job that I loved, and I convinced myself that I should leave it because I was unfit to do that job. And a large part of that was I just didn't feel like I could handle my life anymore. And I thought, well, maybe this is what being a mom is. And so I'm going to do this job and do this job only because it's my job to keep this child alive. And I didn't realize that that was depression. And so I carried on. And it wasn't until he was sleeping and I recovered that I found out that how sick I had been. And then I started replaying that entire experience and every thought that I had had in my mind that I was convinced was real. And I realized, like, wow, there's something missing in our healthcare system, because if I had known how depressed I was, how sick I was, and I'd gone to the doctor, I'm pretty sure I would have been prescribed some kind of medicine. And that's not what my problem was. My problem was that I was awake all night because my child was awake all night. If I had been put on medicine or given some kind of sleep aid, one, I wouldn't have been able to be up with my son all night. Two, that wasn't really my problem. And I wonder if I had never fixed his sleep, if I would have ever gotten better, truly, or if I would have just been depressed forever or carried that depression forever. And so what that really like got me into saving lives by fixing sleep. And that's really my passion. It drives me every single day. I think about it every day because I feel like sleep saved my life, and we can talk about that a little bit later. But I ended up starting the first overnight sleep consulting company in Manhattan way back in the day, like 2007. It was so exciting. We were sleeping on, people's floors and immediately seeing transforming lives. And that was so fun. We did that for years, but I really couldn't scale it and maintain the quality. And so this is a really long answer, but for how I became interested in neurodivergent sleep. But in order to understand why what we were doing was working, I went back and I got a degree in behavioral psychology. And at the time, I didn't know anything about autism. I didn't understand the BCBA community. I didn't understand that there was a whole segment of our healthcare system that was dedicated to behavior. And so when I got into my first class, that was really my first introduction to it. And it made the world make sense to me. And through that, I learned that 80% of autistic people suffer from clinically significant sleep problems. And I was like, well, wait a second, that doesn't make any sense to me. You are the best behaviorists on the planet. You are the ones. And I know that sleep is behavioral because I was doing it way back in the day. So that's what got me into understanding that if I can find a way to scale behavioral sleep therapy by delivering behavioral data to board certified behavior analysts, then we've solved a massive problem.
I love that.
So that's the long story. It's hard to explain because it's not just like, oh, I knew somebody who was autistic and I am, or my child, and I've been learning. It feels sometimes like I'm coming from outside of the world, but the impact of somebody who's suffering from symptoms and sleepless nights is so profound. And to feel like this community is not getting that support because of a data gap, it breaks my heart. So that's what we want to deliver.
I'm going to tell you about a couple of sleepless nights I've had recently. But before I do that, I'm curious, like you mentioned something about halfway through your story, which was like, I hadn't realized how sick I was. And would you say more about that? Because I feel like there's a really important piece there where you're like, come out the other side and look back and you're like, oh God, that's what was going on. Would you say a little bit more about that? The reason I'm asking about it is that for me, that feels like a corollary with me getting my diagnosis. It wasn't to do with depression, but it was definitely that same, like, everything makes sense now. Oh God, kind of moment. So please, if you'd mind.
Yeah. If I'm going to be able to articulate it, but it's a feeling. Like, what if I had believed the things that I was telling myself? And I think about that a lot because when you have postpartum depression, it can manifest in lots of different ways. I just thought, this is the end of me. I don't exist anymore. I'm no good. I'm just going to wish my days away. And I started understanding maternal suicide instead of being like, oh no, somebody killed themselves. I was like, oh, when you identify with why they did it, when you're just like, oh yeah, I can map out exactly what's going, like when you're just like, oh yes, I understand. Like I remember sitting in the middle of the night awake thinking about like child abuse and thinking about like those stories where you hear about somebody's boyfriend coming into the house and, you know, doing terrible things to children. And I'm like, I wonder if that child was not sleeping and that's why that happened. You know, like it can drive you mad. Even after I got better, I started feeling like a lot of our problems with our own identity that's shaped by our parents can manifest from that sleep personality you have when you're a baby. So one of the things that we used to do, we used to interview all of our parents when we would start working with them. And one of the questions was, describe your baby. You know, pretty often there were just gender slighted comments made about the child. So if it was a girl who wasn't sleeping, she was sassy, she was bossy, she's a diva, you know. And if it's a boy, he's really bossy, he's a bully, he makes me do this, you know, he you know, and it's kind of a negative, right? And I would say, you know, you're seeing some signs, some symptoms of, you know, maybe this is accurate, but let's get this child sleeping and see what kind of personality comes out. And then all of a sudden, this, you know, bossy bully baby boy would become this little Buddha, calm, sweet heart. Okay. And what's the difference? The difference is the amount of crying, the amount of protesting. It's not no longer a diva, but a sweetheart and a daddy's girl and so lovey and huggy. And so if you think about how easy it would be to not fix sleep because you feel like it's your duty to just be up all night with your baby, but in your head, you're treating your child like this personality that you're describing based on their negative sleep symptoms. You know, what that can do to shape an individual's impression of themselves.
Right, totally. And that in that point impacts self-image, and you're actually just enabling the behavior rather than trying to encourage otherwise.
And imagine if you hear that you're a diva every day. Oh, she's just bossy. Oh, she's a diva every day for your whole life. What happens to you?
Well, you become
You
one.
know?
I mean,
And then
you're already, so you may as well, kind of thing.
you already are, right? Or maybe you never feel understood or loved because that doesn't feel like who you are. But, you know, the compounding impact of that mischaracterization is profound to me. And so I think about that extrapolated across the neurodivergent community, people who are, you know, already feeling different. And now you have that on top of increased symptoms because you're not sleeping. And so it's like you're being hit from both sides and there's no way out.
And I think for me, it's hard to tell if it's cause or effect, but there's a direct correlation between good sleep and me being better resourced, better able to cope. Everything is just better if I sleep well. But it's a spiral, right? If I sleep well, I'm better during the day. I might choose to go for a run. If I'm not sleeping well, I don't have the energy. I don't want to go for a run. But if I don't go for a run, I sleep worse. And so it's like these spirals, right? That's either are like better and better and better until I plateau on a really good level, or worse and worse and worse until I crash. And then there's some sort of course correction thing. And I think what I'm thinking about the other day is that I've just started a new job and I love my new job and they're very supportive. And it's been an absolutely brutal adjustment. Like that change combined with moving house within the same month, I'm still reeling. I'm still really struggling. I feel like I'm very significantly burnt out. And so I'm struggling with sleep. And I was thinking about that the other day, like something happened and I was just ruminating, right? It's a very autistic thing to do, to kind of leap through a conversation again and again. Like, did I miss anything? Could I have done this better? And then I look at the clock and it's 3 a.m. I've got a call at 7 a.m. At best, I'm going to get 4 hours of sleep. Why do I even bother? I may as well get up. Like, it's not worth it for 4 hours, right? And then I miss a whole night of sleep, or I'm on my phone or whatever, right? Tell me, does that sound familiar at all?
Of course.
So what I'm curious about is what makes neurospicy people particularly prone to poor sleep, if you ever thought about that.
I guess one of the things that I'd like to discriminate about that question is first, so to me, it's a sliding scale. Okay. What you described is actually a very common experience across neurotypes. Whether you know you have some kind of neurodivergence or not, that is a very typical adult thing to happen in the middle of the night. And I think there's a tendency for people to try to say, this is happening because of something about me, or because there's something wrong. Maybe we'll say, okay, well, this is a neurodivergent trait, and therefore it's much harder to break rumination. But can you? Yes, absolutely. The other side of it is somebody who may not be diagnosed as neurodivergent, but maybe they are also ruminating. And they say, well, I'm ruminating because I'm anxious. I have anxiety. I'm doing this because I'm a light sleeper, or I'm doing this because of some other reason. We like to come up with reasons why something is happening. And what I try to do when I'm thinking about sleep is put that to the side a little bit and focus just on what's happening in front of you. Because then you can really start to see setting events and individual behaviors and start to peel it apart and see how we can make subtle, tiny changes in that. Because if you're really trying to blame it on some bigger thing that's going on, then that's a much bigger mountain to go over, because we've got to solve the whole thing. And guess what? If it's because you're neurodivergent, then are you ever going to solve the neurodivergence?
Probably not. Well, let's be honest.
That's not going away, right? That just is, right? So, but are you made to sleep? Are you human?
I mean, I would hope
Yes.
so. There's an interesting thing there that I just want to, and I think that's what you're getting to, but I want to notice something about the language you're using. You're making a differentiation between who you are and things that happen to you or things that happen near you.
Yeah.
And there's an important difference there, and I'll set it up like that, and then you can take it from there.
You're absolutely right. And that's one of the things they teach you in ABA, right? It's not really about the diagnosis, it's just about what's happening. So can we just measure the behavior and see what the rate is and see where somebody developmental should be, so that we can set up a situation to help them achieve their goal? I think in that respect, it's really freeing, because it's not really about the diagnosis, but it's about the individual. And then it's about what is happening. And so one of the things about sleep that I can't wait to start teaching, and this is kind of one of the, I haven't really gotten out there and talked about this a lot, but I guess now that we launched last week, we're going to have to start talking about this a little bit more. But it's about really accepting and exploring what sleep is. And most people don't think about it as a physiological response. People think about sleep as a behavior. So the same way that I am behaving by drinking my coffee, and it's a choice, like I turn it on and turn it off like this.
Yeah.
So, but sleep is actually an automatic response.
Which is what happens to the coffee after you take a sip.
Yeah, exactly. So now digesting my coffee, right? And so my body knows what to do with it. I don't have to tell my body, send the coffee to my stomach, right? Like it just starts, all of the systems start getting into place and doing what it's supposed to do. And I don't even have to be an expert in digestion to make that happen. I just have to know that I am starting that by drinking my coffee or eating these Cheez-Its that are sitting here on my desk. So I can start digesting that way. And sleep is the same. You just have to know the behaviors to do to elicit it.
And there's a reason why you're choosing to work or to focus on neurodivergent folks, right? So on the one hand, the neurodivergence may not be the reason, but there seems to be a strong correlation. And it's interesting that you just use digestion as an example. I can feel my tummy rumbling and gurgling and being unhappy with me right now. And I feel like that's something that's true for me my entire life. And there's very strong correlation between neurodivergence and stomach issues. So again, another one of those physiological things where like, okay, what's going on here?
Yeah. Yeah. But the good thing is, like, the natural question to ask you is, when did you last eat? Or what did you eat?
Right. A smoothie this morning.
You know, okay, so maybe we need to eat again. Maybe that's your body saying time to have something else to eat. And that's within your power, right? Like, we could set up a schedule to get you food before your stomach starts to hurt. And that would be an appropriate intervention, right? And to see if that works and to see if it reduces pain over time. The funny thing about sleep is that we go straight to the internal world before we examine the external world around us. So we do it the opposite. We're obsessed with biometrics. Everybody loves their biometrics. And I love the biometrics too. I love it. Like, thank you, Aura Ring, like, for getting out there and making people care about sleep. Thank you. But the problem with that is that you're starting with the idea that sleep is somehow like to be controlled by your internal environment versus your external environment. It's a subtle way that we communicate that. And we further communicate it by the sleep aid industry. Because if you're going to go to the doctor, 80% chance you're going to get a recommendation for medicine if you're not sleeping, you know? And so again, we're regulating sleep by changing something on the inside of us, as opposed to for being able to examine what's happening on the outside. And that's really what, the visibility that we're trying to add to the equation, which is, your Aura Ring isn't going to tell you, are you falling asleep every night on the couch? It's going to know you're asleep, but it's not going to tell anybody that you fall asleep watching TV and then you move into your room at 3 a.m., which is, really common for a lot of people who are having sleep problems. So once we kind of understand your life a little bit better, then we can put in interventions in place and changes that will help improve that sleep quality.
So why are you focusing on neurodivergence with your company?
I think it's important to start with a community who needs it the most. I think about like all of these kiddos who are in therapy 30 hours a week.
Right.
And who are working really hard on daytime. But those behaviors are not being addressed at night, but they exist. Like, behavior is behavior. It exists infinitely, right? And so I wonder how those behaviors are disappearing in the middle of the night, or what people are doing to cope with all of those behaviors. And I think we're going to start learning a lot more about what's going on. So between different sources, they say, they're 30 to 60% of autistic children are on some kind of sleep aid.
That sounds extraordinary. Is that all medical? Or is that like, could a sleep aid be something, I don't know, something else?
Like, a sleep aid might be medicine,
Right.
like a melatonin, but I mean, it can be severe as Klonopin.
Okay.
And that's going to sedate you into a state of sleep, which means that it is sedating over the behaviors to keep somebody asleep. And what really keeps me up at night is that,
Ironically.
ironically, is that if we are successful at teaching appropriate behaviors during the day and we're making so much progress with these kiddos, why can't we do it at night? Why can't we give them the same benefits of that therapy at night? By being able to turn that subjective data report from parents into something that's objective and actionable, then we can start making some changes and transform their lives. One good night of sleep is transformative, right? Like, imagine never learning and suffering like that for your entire life. What I talked about was just a short period of my life because I had sleep then I didn't have sleep and I saw what happened, and then I got it again. Imagine living your life chronically never sleeping because someone couldn't show you how. And what that means to your quality of life. Like that.
That sounds horrifying. And I know it because I've definitely been in stretches where for 6 months at a time, usually stress related, but for 6 months at a time, my brain just would not slow down enough to be able to get a decent night's sleep. I tried melatonin actually, and I have never been so depressed in my life. Like melatonin made me incredibly like the next morning I would be like, life is pointless. Oh, great. No more melatonin for me. Yeah. I'm on what is considered a microdose now, 0.5 milligrams, which is which is almost nothing. And it may just be placebo, but I feel like it helps. But in any case, I'm really curious what somebody's listening to this, right? The title of the episode is Autism and Sleep. I imagine somebody listening to this is like, hey, this is me. Where do you even begin? Like, what are some common things that people could be considering or looking at to start figuring out their sleep challenges?
The first thing is really understanding that you are in control of your sleep. Like you can control it. That is within your power. And a lot of people don't believe that.
I'm one of those people.
But okay, trust me. Trust me, you are. And I'll give you an example. Okay. I am really tired. Okay. I am a mother of 4. I have been traveling. I am working like crazy. My daughter has swim practice from 5 a.m. to 7 a.m. in the morning. So we are up at 4:30 and I am tired. Could I take a nap? Yes. Yes, I could. Am I sleeping now? No, because I'm on a podcast with my friend, right? And so I'm behaving in a way that is not going to elicit sleep right now. But if I went to my room and I closed all the curtains and I got under my sheets and I got really quiet and I yelled at everybody and I said, "Don't come in." And I quieted my mind off of my schedule, off of the things that were happening, and allowed myself to be still for a little bit, I would be in REM in a second. Understanding that you can do something, I think is really empowering.
So in your example, though, it's not to be a contrarian, but in your example, it is like, what can you actively do not to sleep? I agree, showing up on a podcast is not a great way to get a nap. I can think of a dozen ways to keep myself awake, but the other way around, I'm struggling.
Okay. But what happens is, like you were talking about ruminating, you were talking about being on your phone. Those are all behaviors. Let me give you an example. Have you ever been on a long road trip? You're driving and then you start to get drowsy and your eyes are like pulling down. Okay. So what has happened is your mind is so fatigued at that point that your motivating operation for getting rest is very, very high. You are bored. Nobody is talking to you. You don't want to listen to the music anymore. You've had so many snacks. The coffee isn't interesting anymore. You are literally driving and driving and driving. That motivating operation for rest and escape from this, tedious drive is pulling you hard. That is behavioral quietude. Because there is nothing in the world that is more delicious than succumbing to them pulling into a rest stop and like closing your eyes for just a minute to like give yourself that gift, right? Okay, so that's behavioral quietude. A lot of people will get into bed at night and fall asleep pretty quickly. They might, brush their teeth and crawl into bed. They're so tired. They stayed up late. They worked late and they get in bed and they sleep. And that's the same as like pulling over while you're driving because you're so like the motivating operation to engage in behavioral quietude to elicit sleep is very, very high, more than being on your phone at that time. Like if somebody while you were falling asleep was like, "Hi, get on Instagram," you'd be like, "I'm not interested. I'm not interested. Okay. But you get 3 hours of sleep, you get 4 hours of sleep, maybe 5 hours of sleep. Now that motivation for rest in that moment is not as high. Okay. So Instagram all of a sudden is interesting again, or whatever, TikTok or the crossword or your schedule for the next day or thinking about your job and did you say the right thing or the conflict with your coworker or I sit and think about like politics a lot because I have a son going into the military and how I feel about that. And I feel when I'm up at night, I feel like I'm doing good work. I just think some people think that they're doing that work because they're not sleeping, because they can't sleep. But instead, what's happening is they're doing it instead of sleeping. And the key principle of this is to understand that these are high reinforcing activities and will continue to reinforce that behavior, which will keep you awake and ruminating and doing and moving until your brain is bored of that activity, which is going to take a long time if it's a high reinforcing, especially rumination. Like you are having a conversation with your biggest fan, which is yourself, and that conversation is not going to end. So if you are not aware that you are stuck in an environment that is keeping you awake, then you might not take that next step to do something else that's less reinforcing, fatigue your mind faster, and all of a sudden now you're back into that drowsy, just get me out of this. I'd really like to close my eyes
The
now.
number of times I've woken myself up by dropping a Kindle in my face is high, very high.
I believe it.
But it's one of those things, right? My mind is in this loop. I'm like, if I just read a little bit, it turns on a different part of my brain where I'm now in a world of imagination. And in that world, that is such a small step away from sleep that I often just fall asleep.
Yeah. Okay, that's great. But that's important. That's important to know because what you're doing, like if you understand what that is doing, it is pulling you out of that high reinforcing party environment. Like you have to think about it. Like scrolling and think rumination is like high intense environment. When you start to use your mind to think about other things, that's called an alternative behavior. That is an alternative behavior. And you will fatigue yourself faster by focusing on that other narrative, which isn't as reinforcing. You don't know what's coming. You know what's coming in rumination.
Right. Well, and it's that I feel like a lot of those things, both the rumination and TikTok, are little dopamine factories, right? Like in the rumination, when I hit the same points,
Yeah.
it's little hits of dopamine, I think, and it's definitely on TikTok, etc.
It is. It is. Even though it's dopamine, you can also think about it as it's fun. I'm enjoying this. I like to see people being creative and building beautiful things and over again. And it makes you feel good, or you see something that helps you, that you identify with, and it makes you understand yourself more. And that feeling is great. And so if you understand that you're enjoying this, if you can say to yourself, I am enjoying this, I'm giving myself this time, then you don't have to feel guilty about it. I talk to a lot of people and they're like, I put my phone across the room and then sometimes I get it and I feel really bad. And I'm like, no, don't like put yourself into a state of deprivation. If you're going to look at your phone, look at your phone. If you're going to drink a soda, go ahead and drink the full calorie one. Don't put yourself in a state of deprivation at night, because then you're creating another alternative pathway, increasing that need, and it'll be much harder to move on and do something else than if you just say to yourself, okay, I'm going to give myself a minute, but I'm doing this as a gift. Like, I like this. I'm enjoying this moment. And I know I've got some important things going on the next day. And I know I have to do something else because I'm going to stay in this loop forever if I don't get out of it. And I also know that this book on whatever it is going to be interesting to me enough that I'm going to force myself to read 5 full pages. I'm going to read 5 full pages of this Kindle, and maybe you get to 2. maybe you get to 3. But really actively forcing yourself to do that alternative behavior will change the motivating operations from it's just enough of an activity that you're not like having to go from full interest to this deprivation state. You're just making it a lot easier to switch
Right.
by doing that.
Because in my mind,
And
what
that's
that
why
does is that I'm not replacing something that's interesting with nothing. The kind of imagination of the kid, like this in bed with their eyes closed and just like, I'm asleep now. It's like, no, you're not asleep.
Yeah, you're not. You're not going to do that. So what you're doing is actually a perfect example of a perfect alternative behavior. I would be really interested to see what happens if you say, okay, when I'm up at night, I'm going to tell myself that ruminating is a gift that I'm going to give myself. I'm going to indulge in it. I'm going to get a little bit of those thoughts in. And then I'm going to purposely open up my Kindle and do my reading. And I'm going to pack it away over here. I can go back to that anytime I want, but I'm going to go and intensely do this other thing. And if you continue to practice that and think of it as a behavior that you're choosing to do, not something that's controlling you, then it's going to make a huge difference. And it's going to get easier and easier to do.
And I think there's a weird overlap there with some of the other things that a lot of autistic folks struggle with. And one of them is hating to be told what to do, even by myself.
Interesting.
And I feel like there's a thing there where there's this rebellious streak almost, which is like if somebody tells me what to do, I stop enjoying it. Like if it's my choice, but it's not really my choice because I know that I need to sleep. Like, and it's this weird dance where at some point I'm like, wait a minute, am I really trying to jujitsu myself into doing something? This is crazy.
Yeah, I really like that idea though, because what you're talking about is like demand resistance a little bit. And I feel that with the way that we teach sleep in our culture, because we throw 1 million rules at people. We say 2:30 in the afternoon and I'm sitting here drinking
Yeah,
coffee,
exactly.
okay? And I'm telling you,
Rebel.
like, all right, like, look at me breaking the rules. And the truth is that I am not worried at all about my ability to go to sleep late.
Right.
I got that one covered. I'm exhausted. I can't wait.
Right, totally. Well, and I think there's an interesting piece there, right? There's definitely a trope that is like coffee after a certain time means that you can't sleep. That has never been true for me, ever. Which is interesting.
There's a lot of rules about people go to a lot of effort to turn down the lights in the house. They would turn on soft music. I've been in homes where they talk in whispers around the bedtime to get people because they think that doing all of these things are going to set the stage for better sleep. I don't know. I think it's highly restrictive and a lot of work in a direction that isn't necessary. And then it ends up becoming too demanding to sleep well. And so when you can't do that, you're just not going to sleep.
Well, and I want to be clear too. Like, I'm not making fun of people who are like, I'm very sensitive to caffeine. I shouldn't drink caffeine after 11. If that's true for you, then by all means, that is true. If people whispering around you helps you sleep better, go for it. Absolutely 100% true. But I'm also saying that as somebody who's perfectly going to sleep listening to heavy metal music, right? It's not famously known for its calming effects, but it's just as like my brain just reacts really well to heavy metal, where sometimes for years, Alice in Chains was my sleeping music. And when I tell people that, they're like, wait, what? It's just this droning guitar noise in my ears that just really helps kind of drown out all the thoughts. And then I sleep wonderfully.
I think my problem with all of the rules is that people who don't follow the rules don't think they can sleep. Does that make sense? There's so well, I can't follow that schedule, or I can't talk. My friend does the whisper thing and her child sleeps. And, we have 4 kids under the age of 10. How am I going to get people to be quiet between 6 and 7? Like it's an artificial environment. You have to have a certain life in order to create that environment. And so I think it excludes people from the idea that they can sleep if we have to be so precious around what elicits sleep. If it's working for you and it's important, like, then that's great. But I don't want people to feel like they have to follow so many things, because you're going to be exhausted trying to follow all the rules and miss the one thing that you could
Then at
do.
least you're exhausted, so then you can sleep, right?
Yeah. No, now you're going to give up.
Right.
Imagine the effort, like your job, your one job, Haje, is literally to give yourself a minute to ruminate and do some TikTok. And then the hard work for you is saying, okay, time's up, me. I'm going to open my Kindle and do my reading. And I'm going to intensely do my reading so that I can get my mind off of this fun thing and what it wants to do, enough that behavioral quietude can take over, and then I can get the sleep I need to be my best. Okay, that is the hard work. So if you have fatigued yourself by, doing all of these other 5 million things, then you are not going to have the reserves to do that hard work that's going to really make a difference. So,
And for me, the wild thing is today is technically a national holiday. And so, I don't have work. And so I turned off my alarm. Actually, that's not true. I set my alarm for 50 minutes before this interview just in case. But I woke up before my alarm normally goes off. But the fact that I woke up like naturally to the sun coming up, to the birds outside, I sleep with my sliding door open. So it's like the world coming to life kind of thing. And just being able to snuggle up in the bed and go, my brain hasn't turned on yet. I get to enjoy my brain not having started up, but I'm feeling the warmth of my duvet. I'm hearing the birds. What a beautiful moment this is. And I think I fell asleep for another 10 minutes or so and then came back out of it. And I was like, what a treat. And that was like a moment where I was like, I have to tell Conner about this because I did my homework. And I was out of my bed before my alarm would have gone off. And then there's days where I get the same amount of sleep in hours. My alarm goes off and I'm angry. I'm like, no, well, not the alarm, you know?
I guess I think about life a little bit like one big sporting event. Sometimes you're going to be more fatigued than others, and you're going to need more sleep than you do on other days. And the work that we do each day is hard in different ways. You've been moving houses, that's physically demanding, but also emotionally demanding, and switching your jobs. You're in a state of constant change right now and adjusting to all of those little things. And so it makes sense that you're going to be more tired sometimes than others as you adjust to all of this change. And I wish that there was a way that we could build in more time to rest into our culture when those are happening, because I certainly oh gosh, after our first day at that conference last week, I crawled back to our hotel room because it was just sensory overload and like the buildup of that day. If you're in that state, like literally every day, like imagine the amount of sleep that you're going to need to do it. And so I think maybe that's just information that you need more breaks, you need more rest. Give it to yourself so that you can get through and process.
And I think when I'm well-resourced, I'm able to take more breaks. It's super ironic, but when I'm under-resourced, I'm like, oh no, if I don't work hard, I'm going to lose my job. And you get caught in these I get caught in these horrible loops where I think it's anxiety, where I'm like, there's this undercurrent sense of impending doom. And with that, I'm like, well, if I just do everything as good as I can, everything's going to be okay, right? But as you just said, like that is exhausting and it actually burns more energy and I get less rest. And that means I don't go for exercise because I feel tired. And then, it's that spiral again. Hey, we're going to try and keep this to under an hour. And there's a couple of questions I really want to ask you. The first and most important one is, tell me about Percy. What is this company you're building? What are you doing? And how does this intersect with sleep and neurodivergence?
So we are building a behavior measurement tool. We're using all of the sensors that they use in self-driving vehicles without video and using AI to intuit what is happening at night. And we lay that out across a timeline and we share it with your doctor so that they can get a snapshot into what's going on in your life without you having to create logs or report everything or try to second guess whatever they need. And then they can personalize your treatment to address the thing that is really the most important to improving your sleep.
So is this a wearable?
It is not a wearable. You just plug it in and let it collect.
So I've seen pictures of this thing. So it's basically like, imagine like a Google Nest, except without a camera, right? Oh, look at that, you have one.
Look, nice, amazing that I just happen to have one right here. So it sits on your bedside table or it connects on the wall. We have this really cool magnetic mount, and then it connects and you can kind of direct it. And we're not using video, but we're using heat and radar to understand your motions and whether or not you're in bed and are you interacting with other people. And a lot of times that really helps us understand, like, what are the co-occurring things happening? So as you're falling asleep, are there other activities that are going on around you? Or are you being woken up by something, like going back to what was going on with me, I had an environmental problem. When I was depressed and I wasn't sleeping and I was going through that time that we talked about, like, I didn't need a sleep aid. What I had was an environmental problem. I needed an intervention and some help to help me teach my son what to do. And so the objective of our device is to really help doctors and therapists discriminate whether somebody is really suffering from a medical sleep condition or that something else has to be addressed. Because a narrative that a parent is going to tell themselves about what's going on with their child is based on their perspective and their understanding of what sleep is. And that's all doctors have to go on to understand what's happening. So if you have a chronic condition or something that you're managing over time, where there are symptoms when you are sleep deprived, there really sometimes is no choice but to medicate if you can't get that story. And so we want to get ahead of that and say, is this medication the right thing for this individual? Or is there some other change that needs to happen in order to get to that fundamental reason why this person isn't sleeping? But the other thing is, sleeping isn't about just learning to sleep once. Like, how to sleep, but you have a sleep problem right now, right? You have a lot of change in your life and you're going through a lot of rumination and adjustments and understanding yourself. And that's probably been creeping up for a while. And a lot of times people don't go to the doctor and ask for help until after there's some gigantic health event that happens, some major life-changing event. Whether you have a chronic condition like epilepsy, then maybe you have a seizure, and then now everybody's going back and trying to figure out what happened. And I think that if we can start treating sleep as a vital sign in somebody's life, like, are we managing it, especially when it comes to dealing with those symptoms that happen during the day, then we will transform healthcare. Like, we'll be able to get ahead of health events and we will be able to repair as opposed to like putting pieces back together.
Yeah, I love that. And so you're pretty early stage, right? I can't currently buy this product or.
Not yet. We're doing pilots now. So we're looking for partners to do research with and to validate the use and their practices. And our hope is to be available in 2026.
Awesome.
So ask your doctor for it. We're going to be selling it to doctors' offices, behavioral centers, hospital systems, and using it as a therapeutic tool. And we're giving it away. The device is free and we're charging them a subscription to the database because we want people to have access to better sleep health care. So we don't want to create barriers to entry. We want people to be able to have it
Love
if
that.
they need it.
Thank you. I have two standard questions that I love to finish these interviews with. And the first one is, what do you wish neurotypical people understood about neurodivergence?
Oh my goodness, Haje. I don't feel like I can answer that question. I don't feel like I'm the right one for that. But I do feel like I want to give hope around sleep because sleep is medicine. Sleep in itself is medicine, and it will help you cope with your life. It is life altering, and who you are in a sleep deprived state is not your best self. And it is within your control. And there are things that we can do to improve your life. Hopefully, 30 to 60% of people who are autistic should not be on medicine at night to sedate behaviors. We should be able to address it. So if there is some kind of better supports that we can put into place, it's going to be transformative.
And my final one, could you tell me of a time when you felt loved in exactly the right way for you?
Gosh. I guess I'd have to, that's a really tough question. I'd say where I feel the most happy is in my relationship with my children. I love them so much. And I guess I just don't even think about myself feeling loved. I love them so much. And when I'm with them, I feel so grateful for my life. And so I think maybe that's what you're talking about. Like the fact that they tolerate me. I look at them and I'm like, oh my gosh, you are the best. I just love everything about you and you tolerate me. You want me. I'm like, I am here for it, kiddo. That's where I feel so grateful. I have to check myself a lot with my kids because you don't want it to depend on your children to make you feel good, right? They're allowed to reject you. But if you're asking me how I feel when my kids love me, it's the greatest feeling on the planet.
I love that. Conner, thank you so much for your time. This was a delightful interview, and I always love spending time with you. So thank you.
Thank you, Haje. You always make me think.
Not sorry. Thank you so much for tuning into today's episode of the podcast. You can catch more of our content on TikTok at Autistic FM. You can follow us on Instagram at autistic_FM, and you can visit our website at autistic.fm. There you can subscribe for free, join discussions about each episode, and suggest future guests that we should consider inviting in on the show. There you can subscribe for free, join discussions about each episode, and suggest future guests that we should consider inviting on the show. This podcast is produced and hosted by me, Haje Camps, and expertly edited by Sean Portillo. It's been a genuine pleasure to have you here with us, and thank you for listening. It's been a genuine pleasure to have you here with us. Thank you so much for listening, and see you next time.